Let's start with LSU football. Let's start with Matt House. This has been long awaited, right? The coordinator hires. You'd seen him bring in Kerry Cooks. Okay, they're going to retain Brad Davis. The big splash to this point was bringing back Frank Wilson to LSU, but everyone kept having an eye on the coordinator search, both offensive and defensive coordinators, and there's a little bit of angst, right? You head into the early signing period. You don't have those guys in place. People are wondering, is it going to hurt you? It didn't. I mean, you ended up landing Quincy Wiggins on the defensive side. You end up with 13 signees there. Keep Walker Howard in the boat. Oh, yeah, we all know how that played out. That worked fine. Now you get into the dead period. It's okay, but you still need these coordinators in place. Now you have one of them. Matt House. He was long rumored for this spot. Linebackers coach for the Kansas City Chiefs, will join LSU after the Chiefs season ends. So that will either be after they hoist the Lombardi Trophy or when they're eliminated from the playoffs. January or mid-February is when you'll see Matt House. But what's important is he's in the boat. And on the surface, man, this looks like a phenomenal hire for Brian Kelly.
I agree. I'm pumped. I think this is a great hire for Brian Kelly. And we know that they went after Brad White originally, Kentucky's current defensive coordinator. Couldn't get him to come to Baton Rouge, so they went after Kentucky's former defensive coordinator. Before Brad White, it was House, and he had some success at Kentucky Musso. I remember that 2018 defense with Cash Daniels. That team went 10-2, which over there was a huge deal. That was the best season Kentucky football had in a really long time, and he had some success there, and he had some success with the Chiefs as well as an assistant. And this time, this is a guy that people were trying to hire. Last season, 2 schools had interest in him, and I believe it was Tennessee and Auburn, 2 SEC schools.
Tennessee for sure, and they threw a boatload of money at him.
So this is a guy that was trying to be hired by other people. This is a guy that has called plays on the college level before, so it already looks like a little bit more of a responsible hire, at least on the surface. But I do agree with you. The track record is there, and we'll see how he fits in at LSU, but he's taken over a really talented defense, and I think he's going to have a lot of success.
And obviously, you can look at the resume and see the success he's had at Kentucky, the success he's had, in Kansas City, the success he's had at FIU, at Pitt. You can look at all of that and get really excited. But, Mario, it's the same thing we talked about when LSU hired Frank Wilson. What are current or former players of his saying? And the one that made the biggest splash was from a current player of Matt House's, but a former LSU Tiger, and that's Kansas City Chiefs safety Tyrann Mathieu, who quote tweeted the LSU announcement last night saying, quote, "I'm excited for Coach House and all of Tiger Nation. This man loves football and teaching. One of the best I've been around. This Tiger defense will be well coached from day one. Let's all buy in. Forever LSU." That is a ringing endorsement. And if you clicked on that tweet, if you just scrolled through your timeline, knowing most of you follow a lot of LSU accounts, you saw this sentence. "Oh, if Honey Badger likes it, it's good enough for me." And look, that's a ringing endorsement from arguably the best defensive player in LSU history.
Yeah, and hopefully House has some respect right off the bat for his players that, had to adjust to a whole lot. They lost Corey Raymond, who they thought really highly of. But like you said, if Tyrann Mathieu is given that endorsement, that's a pretty good endorsement. And they have to feel good about not just the endorsement from Tyrann, but the track record that we were talking about. And you mentioned his time in Kentucky being impressive. Remember the players that got drafted from that group, Musso. These guys played for Matt House. Josh Allen from the Jaguars, Lonnie Johnson, who was a second-round pick, and the third-round pick in Mike Edwards. That 2018 Kentucky defense ranked number 6 in the nation in points allowed per game, and they held opponents to 14 points or less 6 times. So like I said, that was a very memorable season in Lexington. And then as far as Kansas City goes, maybe it's hard to judge success as a linebackers coach, like as a positional coach, but he is a Super Bowl champion. And like I said, Tyrann Mathieu apparently liked playing for him. Not just that, this is a guy that had to practice, or his players had to practice against an offense that was led by Brian Benamy and Andy Reid, and the players like Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill that they had to defend every single day is going to make for a pretty good group. So you would think that right off the bat, he has a lot of respect from his players.
This is what I'll say overall about Matt House is whether it's Kentucky, whether it's Pittsburgh, whether it's the Carolina Panthers where he spent a year early in his career, whether it's FIU, Kansas City Chiefs, wherever he goes, success follows. Whether it's directly tied to him and his defense or his linebacker group, he's around success everywhere he goes, and that's very important. When he spent a year with the Carolina Panthers in 2008, they won the NFC South and were 12-4. At the Kansas City Chiefs, he's been to 2 Super Bowls and won one. At Pittsburgh, coaching players like Aaron Donald, his defense helped lead Pittsburgh to 2 bowl wins in 3 seasons. At Kentucky, 3 years there, 2 as the defensive coordinator, 1 as a special teams coordinator and linebackers coach. The first year he's defensive coordinator, Kentucky's not great defensively. They gave up 28 points per game. It was rough. But 1 year later, the year you're talking about, 2018, the turnaround is stark and success followed. 10-2, 6th in the country in scoring defense. They were top 20 in the nation in total defense. Success follows him wherever he goes, and it's because of him in most instances. And that is a reason to get extremely excited about the Matt House hire.
Yeah, and the blend of college experience and NFL experience as well is really interesting. And that's kind of a concern, I guess, for most people. Maybe not call it a concern, but what is his ultimate motivation? Does he want to be a head coach in college? Does he want to be a coordinator in the NFL? Which, despite his resume being impressive so far, he has not done that. So I don't know if he eventually wants to go back to the NFL, but I also don't think that's a deal breaker when you're making decisions like this, Musso. And it'll be interesting to see if he has success early. But like I said, Brian Kelly was going to have a list. He was going to have a process. And the first guy did not work out, the current Kentucky defensive coordinator and Brad White, but this is a guy that has just as good, if not a better track record. And this is a hire that the fan base is going to get behind. But like I said, he's taking over a new group. They're going to have to adjust to a lot. Let's see what happens. But on the surface, it looks like a really, really good hire.
Oh, on the surface, I think it's a great hire. I think it's an all-star hire on the surface. And to your point, it is interesting. You look at his career track and you try to, that's always, especially at a school like LSU, right? That's always something you're trying to figure out is, okay, well, what's the next step for this coach? LSU is not necessarily a stepping stone job in the conventional sense. It's more of a job that can pole vault you to greater success, to a head coaching position. Look at Dave Aranda, obviously, is your most recent example there of a coordinator. But even so, look at somebody like Joe Brady, who I know didn't end great in Carolina, but he parlayed a passing game coordinator job at LSU into an NFL OC. It takes you to that next level. So in a way, yes, stepping stone, but not in the conventional sense that you think. So obviously that's always a conversation as, okay, well, what's the end goal for whoever you're bringing in? When you look at somebody like Matt House and you look at kind of where he's been, all roads have always kind of led back to the NFL. Just based off resume, a few short stints early on in his career in college, then the first job with the Carolina Panthers, a year there, and then goes to the Rams for 3 years, and then is back in college at Pitt, FIU, Kentucky, and then back to the NFL. So, yeah, I mean, there's certainly something there he's looking for. He hasn't been in a lot of places long, but that's fine. Ultimately that's what you want as the norm at LSU now, because that means you're hiring good coaches. That's going to lead to a lot of success on the field. How often do coordinators stay at Alabama? I know that's always the example thrown out, and they're the standard and whatnot. But even Georgia, in there, Ryan Day gets to replace coordinators. Clemson's replacing both coordinators now after the end of this season. They've already started that process. Dabo promoted from within. That's the hallmark of a good program. So, yeah, maybe you down the road think about, okay, where is he trying to end up? And certainly from his resume, all signs have always pointed back to the NFL, but who knows? We'll have to wait and see. Right now, he's an LSU Tiger. He's a major factor in Brian Kelly's staff right now, and man, it's a great hire.
Yeah, I don't know if I would call a job on the staff a stepping stone, but I think based on the context we're seeing, it's clear that a coaching job at LSU is held in really high regard, because think about it, Kentucky or Tennessee, Auburn, 2 schools with a lot of unknown going into last season. You could argue, both of them with the first-year head coach, maybe they're going in a better direction, but he didn't want to leave that job, right? He didn't want to leave his assistant job in the NFL to be a coordinator for either one of those schools. LSU is also coming off 2 straight 500 seasons. This is a 6-6 football team that did not play well the last couple of years, but he sees the vision. He sees the power of that position at LSU. And like we said, we don't know what his motivation is, but he does think coming to LSU is going to help him get there. And he did not hold the jobs at Tennessee and at Auburn in the same regard.
Right. Right. So, okay, stepping stone again. That's the word that came to mind. It's not at all what I meant. Springboard. How about that? That's more of what LSU is. It springboards you up. Dave Aranda's a college head coach. Joe Brady was a NFL coordinator. Even Matt Canada, while, yeah, look, I guess that didn't end up great here at LSU, but he left LSU and went to the NFL and is now an offensive coordinator for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So just to use as an example, that's kind of where you get it. Springboards you to where you want to be a college head coach. That's the next step from here. You want to be an NFL coordinator. That's potentially the next step from here. But all of that's down the road in the future. The more important part is he's an LSU Tiger. It's a great resume. You can expect a lot of success on defense for LSU with Matt House at the helm.
Yeah, like we said, on the surface, the last two coordinator hires, you kind of had to talk yourself into. You kind of had to bring in a hope element to talk about them potentially having success at LSU. You don't have to do that with Matt House. Matt House has had success, like you said, everywhere he's gone, as a play caller, as an assistant. And Brian Kelly thought that he was the next best step. I really like the organization that we've seen throughout this search, Musso, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with the offensive coordinator, although we've definitely heard some names, but we are getting some clarity in this, and that's good to see as LSU goes into year one of Brian Kelly at the helm.
Clarity for sure. Now, again, it wasn't just Matt House. That was announced last night. Earlier this morning, it was announced that Robert Steeples is joining Brian Kelly's staff as a defensive assistant coach. Steeples, currently an assistant special teams coach for the Minnesota Vikings. Like House, will join LSU once the Vikings season ends, which could be on the last day of the regular season, January 9th in the NFL. Steeples is a defensive back by trade. He was a standout cornerback at Missouri and at Memphis, was undrafted into the NFL as a cornerback, ended up on spent time with the Vikings, the Rams, and the Chiefs, I believe. And I can double check that. I'm sorry. The Vikings, the Chiefs, Dallas, and he went undrafted to the Rams, and then got into coaching. No college experience, which is interesting, but plenty of high school experience and plenty of successful high school experience. He jumped straight from being a high school head coach to the NFL. Day Summit Jesuit High School, tongue twister that probably really shouldn't have been one, but was, turned that place into a powerhouse. His first year, they were 2-8. In 2016, by 2019, a state champion, 29-4, a combined record to close it out, 20-game winning streak, had the team ranked as high as number 8 in the country, and then took the role with the Minnesota Vikings. It stands to reason, him being a cornerback, you would imagine he's going to have some role coaching DBs at LSU. You say, well, wait a minute, Moose. Gary Cooks, well, you remember reports abound when Cooks was hired. That threw into the influx with Corey Raymond. What's going to happen to Corey Raymond? And the report was Brian Kelly traditionally has had 2 defensive back coaches on his staff. So you might see a tandem effort here with Steeples and Gary Cooks, whether that's what you saw with Raymond and Bill Bush, one coaching DBs, one coaching corners, one coaching safeties, or one over the entire DBs and one as maybe an assistant DBs coach. That remains to be seen. Kelly's going to get everyone, all the staff compiled, then divvy out those roles. But you have 10 on-field assistant roles, and Steeples is a young up-and-comer at 32 years old and certainly looks like a really good hire for his first college job.
Yeah, so the second half of the last season, a big narrative was what's going to be next. Who is going to stay on this staff? Because we know that Coach O is not. And an answer from a lot of people was the new coach is going to have new dominion. He's going to bring in whoever he wants, and there's not going to be any kind of ultimatum to keep anybody currently on staff. But we've arrived this far, Musso, and I think the only position coach job that's still open is the defensive line. And I'm going to say that I think
on defense,
excuse me. And I'm going to say that I think Andre Carter did a really good job this past season. I think he could be a successful coach, but I don't think they're keeping anybody else from this past staff. I think it's very clear that Brian Kelly has his guys. He has a process to find them, and we're going to continue to see that progress.
That certainly seems the direction they're heading, yes. Brad Davis, so far the only retained staff member. LSU and Brian Kelly have filled out 6 staff spots. So far, they have 4 remaining, including offensive coordinator, wide receivers coach, and you'll have that other that 10th assistant spot as well that you can play with. So Matt House in the boat as defensive coordinator. Robert Steeples in the boat as a defensive assistant.